The first time she dismissed him, it was in front of everyone, and the silence that followed was louder than any insult. The morning sun had just begun to spill gold across the glass walls of the corporate plaza, turning everything into something that looked important, expensive, untouchable. Cars lined the driveway in a slow-moving parade of wealth and ambition. Among them, one modest black sedan stood quietly, its engine humming with patience rather than prestige. Behind the wheel sat Aariz Khan, his hands steady, his eyes calm, his posture unshaken despite the chaos around him. He wasn't dressed like the executives stepping out of luxury cars. His shirt was simple, neatly pressed but worn at the collar. To most people, he looked exactly what they assumed him to be, a driver, nothing more. And to Zara Mehta, he wasn't even that. He was invisible. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that people are often more than what they appear, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Wisdom Story House. Stories like this deserve to be felt, not just heard. Zara stepped out of her sleek white SUV, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her presence commanding attention without effort. She was known in the company as someone who didn't tolerate inefficiency, who believed respect was earned only through status and results. Her rise had been fast, her expectations even faster. When she saw Aariz standing near the sedan, she didn't see a man. She saw a service. Without even looking directly at him, she gestured impatiently toward a stack of documents in her assistant's hands and told Aariz to carry them upstairs. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't kind either. It was dismissive, automatic, like speaking to a machine that existed only to obey. Aariz didn't argue. He nodded, took the files carefully, and followed behind her into the building. Inside, the air conditioning wrapped everything in a chill that felt detached from reality. Employees moved with urgency, screens flickered with numbers, and conversations carried the quiet weight of ambition. Aariz walked through it all silently, unnoticed except when someone needed something moved, opened, or delivered. He had been working there for 3 months now, hired through an outsourced service company that provided drivers and general assistant staff. He never complained. He never corrected anyone who assumed things about him. He simply did what was asked and left quietly at the end of the day. But his life outside those glass walls was anything but quiet. Every evening, he rushed home to a small apartment tucked between busy streets and flickering streetlights. Waiting for him there was his 6-year-old daughter, Meher, whose laughter could fill spaces that money never could. She had a habit of running to the door the moment she heard his footsteps, her tiny arms wrapping around him like he was the safest place in the world. And to her, he was. Being a single father hadn't been part of Aariz's plan. Life had shifted abruptly 2 years ago, leaving him with responsibilities that felt both heavy and sacred. He had once lived a very different life, one filled with boardrooms, decisions that moved millions, and a name that carried weight in circles far beyond that office. But none of that mattered anymore, at least not on the surface. He had stepped away from it all, quietly, intentionally, for reasons no one in that building could guess. To them, he was just a driver. Days passed, and Zara's treatment of Aariz remained the same, efficient, indifferent, occasionally dismissive. She never asked his name. She never noticed the way he handled tasks with unusual precision, or the way he spoke with quiet clarity when someone actually listened. She didn't see the man behind the role. One afternoon, during a particularly stressful meeting, Zara's presentation files went missing minutes before a crucial client pitch. Panic spread quickly. Assistants searched frantically, whispers filled the room, and the pressure began to crack even Zara's composed exterior. That's when Aariz stepped forward, holding a neatly organized folder. He had noticed earlier that the files had been misplaced and had taken the time to reprint and arrange them exactly as they were needed. He handed them over without a word, his expression calm. Zara took them, barely glancing at him, and walked into the meeting as if nothing had happened. The presentation went flawlessly. The client signed a major deal. Applause followed. But no one acknowledged the quiet moment that had saved everything. Except one person. Rohan Iqbal, one of the senior partners, had been watching. He had seen Aariz' composure, his attention to detail, and something else, something familiar. But he said nothing. Not yet. Weeks turned into months, and small moments like that continued to unfold. Aariz would anticipate problems before they surfaced. He would offer solutions without seeking credit. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that didn't match the role he played. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, people began to notice. Zara didn't. For her, the world was still divided into categories: leaders and followers, decision-makers and support staff. She had worked too hard to climb out of obscurity to start questioning those lines now. Or maybe she was afraid to. Then came the day everything changed. It was a bright morning, the kind that felt full of possibility. The company had been buzzing with news of a major acquisition deal that could redefine its future. Rumors spread about a new investor, someone with significant influence, someone whose identity had been kept confidential until the final announcement. The conference hall was packed. Executives, employees, media, all waiting. Zara sat in the front row, confident, composed, ready to impress whoever this new figure was. She adjusted her blazer, her mind already calculating opportunities. And then the doors opened. Aariz walked in. Not in his usual attire. Not as a driver. He wore a tailored suit, his presence commanding in a way that silenced the room almost instantly. His posture hadn't changed, but everything else had. The quiet man who had blended into the background now stood at the center of attention. Whispers spread like wildfire. Zara's breath caught. Her mind struggled to connect the image in front of her with the person she had dismissed countless times. Rohan stepped forward, a faint smile on his face, and introduced Aariz as the primary investor behind the acquisition. A visionary entrepreneur who had built and sold multiple successful ventures, who had chosen to step back from the spotlight to focus on personal priorities, and who had now returned. The room erupted in applause. Zara didn't clap. She couldn't. Her thoughts raced through every interaction, every moment she had overlooked, every time she had treated him as less than what he was. But the truth that hit her hardest wasn't about his wealth or status. It was about the way she had failed to see him as a person. Aariz's gaze moved across the room, calm, steady, until it met hers. There was no anger in his eyes. No satisfaction. Just a quiet understanding that made everything feel heavier. The days that followed were filled with change. Aariz didn't make dramatic moves or public statements. He didn't call anyone out. Instead, he began to reshape the company culture in subtle but powerful ways. Policies were introduced that emphasized respect at every level. Training sessions focused on empathy, leadership, and human connection. The hierarchy remained, but the way people were treated within it began to shift. Zara found herself struggling. Not because of external pressure, but because of something internal. For the first time in years, she began to question her own beliefs. She noticed the receptionist she had never greeted, the janitor she had walked past without acknowledgement, the assistants who carried more than just tasks. And she noticed Aariz. Not as an investor. Not as someone powerful. But as a man who had carried himself with dignity even when no one recognized it. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights began to flicker on, Zara stayed behind. She sat at her desk, staring at nothing, her thoughts heavy with realization. She knew she needed to say something. Not because it was expected, but because it was necessary. She found Aariz in one of the quiet meeting rooms, reviewing documents. For the first time, she approached him without urgency, without assumption. Just as a person. Her voice was softer than it had ever been, her words sincere, her apology unguarded. She didn't try to justify her actions. She didn't hide behind her position. She simply acknowledged the truth, that she had failed to see him, and that she was sorry. Aariz listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react immediately. When he finally spoke, his response was simple but profound. He said that people often see what they expect to see, not what's actually there. And that sometimes, life gives us moments like this, not to shame us, but to help us grow. There was no resentment in his tone. Only clarity. That moment changed Zara more than any promotion or success ever had. She began to rebuild herself, not her career, but her perspective. She learned to listen, to notice, to treat every person with the same level of respect she expected for herself. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. Aariz continued to lead quietly, balancing his responsibilities at work with his life as a father. Meher remained his center, his reason for every decision. And in many ways, she was the reason he had stepped into that building as a driver, in the first place, to understand, to observe, to reconnect with the human side of the world he had once dominated. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons aren't taught from the top. They're learned from the ground. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Your engagement helps stories like this reach others who might need them. And before we close, here's something special. Comment below with one act of kindness you'll do today. Let's turn stories into action. In the end, Zara didn't just gain a new perspective. She gained something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of what it means to truly see people. And Aariz? He never needed recognition to prove who he was. Because the strongest identities don't demand attention. They reveal themselves, quietly, powerfully, when the time is right.